In a sense, then, it's not the personality that chooses the body or the parents, or it's the soul that chooses it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But if a person gets caught in routine and gets lost in the quagmire of life, then the ego takes over and the soul is diminished. And now the person is doing their best to become a somebody, a someone, own something, be somewhere in some time. And of course, if that's the journey, and the person's not willing to find wisdom or look for truth, then they can play on that level for as long as they want until they're tired of it. And when they finally get bored with it, and they'll want to choose something else. And eternity is a long time, wouldn't you agree? So then the soul then says, okay, here's the options, probable lines of time. There are probable lines of time that are the more probable than others. And there is a probable line of time for living in the same body and raising your frequency to the point where you can go wherever you want with your body. That's the ultimate, yes or no?
Yes.
And you can whip bread out of nothing, and you can be in two places at once, and you can be on an alternate universe and have a whole life there, and you can be dimensional. That's the freedom of when you've mastered yourself and you've mastered the conditions. But most of us are headed in a certain timeline based on our genes and based on our own personal evolution. And that's what makes this time right now so powerful. This time right now is the age of information. And in the age of information, ignorance is actually a choice. And people are beginning to realize that I don't need a doctor to find out what my disease is. I don't need to go to the library or talk to my teacher. I can just find the information. And people are starting to wake up to greater understandings, and that is starting to become the collective. And that collective energy in the field, the collective consciousness, the collective awareness is changing the future of humanity. Yes or no?
Yes.
And at the same time, the past is crumbling. There is economic collapse, there's political collapse, there's religious collapse, there's environmental collapse, there's all of that is breaking down. Journalistic collapse. I mean, who watches the news and expects to hear the truth? I mean, it's just all falling apart, and it's becoming so obvious to people that all of a sudden they're realizing that the people that run the world or people that are in places of power are actually really, really worse off than you and I. And the only thing that has to happen is that we have to collectively become one mind. And when we collectively become one mind, we no longer are seduced by those things. And we are now like a flock of birds all moving in the same direction, and those fish all of a sudden moving as a school. Nobody's leading, everybody's leading. We're just connected. And what do you think we're doing when you tune in to the power of love in this room? Don't you know everybody dialing into that same frequency is causing that frequency to be in this room? And if everybody's doing it, it's getting more collimated, more coherent, more organized. And if you put your attention on it, there's more of it. So then when you're leading with your heart, that's enough. That's enough. So then when you have a collective mind, and people are moving in that way, and they're no longer reacting to politics or whatever, and they no longer need those things, you're catching somebody who's starting to awaken. Yes or no? Yes. And if you're focusing on the divine, and that's where all of your attention is, you won't see ethnicity. You won't see skin color. You won't see anything as separation. You'll just be like, wow, nice costume to the masquerade. I should have wore that. It's crazy because then people go get their genetics found out, and some of them just really have an intolerance to some culture, and they're 40% of that culture. So what makes this time for me so unique, and I'm speaking personally, is that there's such a quickening going on. More things are happening in a shorter amount of time. Would you agree?
Yes.
And if more things are happening in a shorter amount of time, it becomes more difficult to predict the next moment. This point we're reaching, this nodal point, is the point of unpredictability, and the old is collapsing. And the collapsing of the old should never be faced with fear, with bigotry, with anger, with hostility, with guilt, sadness, and shame, because that's how we've been controlled all along. And by the way, I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but if you want to control people, manipulate their emotions. So as we move closer and closer to that point, the probability of us changing our life, the length of our life, not from low stress foods and not from vitamins, all those things are good, matter to matter. But stress is going to downregulate the gene, consume the body's energy, and now that's going to begin to signal the gene to produce the disease that the person has inherited in the first place. Are you with me still? So when you react to someone or something and you're living by the same emotional state, you keep the same genes on, the same genes off, and that's your genetic destiny. And now the awakening of this, even if we changed little timelines just this week, we changed lines of time, you change something about yourself, you are going to walk into a different future that is your genetic timeline. And now you're bumped off course. You just got to be willing to stay in the unknown and be comfortable with it. And that's when you're at your greatest.